So we have two groups of folks here. Some of them are from Nebraska, some are from Virginia. They have very different perspectives on obtaining and using court data. So in Nebraska, they have a statewide legal aid program, and they've been able to forge an effective data partnership with their Administrative Office of the Courts. In Virginia, they have 10 different legal aid programs, which can be, a bit of a struggle to get everyone on the same page, but they've done a great job of that. And they've had a little bit of a challenge working with their courts and getting data, so they've had to turn to alternative measures to obtain and use that data. So I'm gonna pass it over to our panelists to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit more about their programs and what they've been working on. We want this to be a dialogue, but we're gonna ask that you hold your questions and comments till the end of the session, and then we can have some back and forth. So without further ado, do you guys wanna start with Virginia?
Hi, I'm Steve Fishback. I'm litigation director at the Virginia Poverty Law Center, which is the state support center for the other 9 legal aid programs in Virginia.
Hi, my name is Amy Deisel-Allman. I'm the Director of Advocacy for Virginia Legal Aid Society. We are one of those other 10 legal aids. I've been with legal aid for 15 years. We are a primarily rural program, and we you'll hear my perspective on things primarily from using the court data for eviction purposes. That's when we've really used it the most.
Hi, I'm Jen Gahn. I am the Chief of Legal Strategy at Legal Aid of Nebraska. I oversee our legal program, and I have been with Legal Aid for 24 years.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shaw Sutherland. I'm also from Legal Aid of Nebraska. I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation, and I have been with Legal Aid about 7.5 years.
And I'm Hazel Delgado. I am the Director of Research and Data for the Administrative Office of the Courts and Probation for the state of Nebraska. And I have been in this position since April of 21. And this is a relatively new position for our state. We did have an analyst focused on court data prior to this, but we really have worked on developing an entire research division that has really helped sort of forge some of these relationships.
Great. So we're gonna start looking at a little bit at what Nebraska has established. So in the past, Legal Aid of Nebraska submitted data requests to the courts on a regular basis. But recently you've transitioned to a more formal data sharing partnership. What motivated you guys to make this change?
So like I said, I'm relatively new to my position, and coming into this position, it's kind of daunting because you don't know who's getting data, why they're getting data, how often it's going out. And so when I first started, Legal Aid of Nebraska was really trying to use the data for a statewide program and present on it on a really quick turnaround. And in those data requests that were established previously, it said, before you share this data with anyone, you have to tell the AOCP, so the Nebraska Administrative Office of the Courts. And just because of the turnaround, it wasn't going to be fast enough. And so they weren't able to use the data because then it was communication. Well, what analysis did you run? How are you using this? How are you interpreting these different data points? And so that's where it really struck a chord with me on my end, where I said, we really need to be able to expedite this process. And from a court perspective, it was important to us that we knew that Legal Aid of Nebraska understood the court data, what they're getting, and why, and that we understood why they're using it and what way they're using it. So for us to have that mutual understanding was extremely important. So we really started building that relationship and having those conversations between the court's leadership and legal aid's leadership. So we actually established an MOU, or a data sharing agreement, that we entered into in December of 21. So it did take a while for us to get there, But we did establish a data sharing agreement. So now I know exactly what data Kelly's getting quarterly. When she has questions, she knows who to talk to, how to get those questions answered relatively quickly. And since we know what analysis she's running, we're able to expedite some of those processes.
Great. In contrast, the courts in Virginia have been less receptive to kind of formal data sharing agreements with legal services providers. So instead, the providers in Virginia have had to form partnerships with one another to coordinate their services, as well as with entities like our data team at LSC, or with the RVA Eviction Lab, which you might be familiar with, which is at Virginia Commonwealth University. So Amy and Steve, can you tell us a little bit more about how your organizations came to be involved in these collaborations?
Sure. At the beginning of the pandemic, of course, there was everything going on with the eviction crisis and, trying to figure out how legal aid was going to respond to that. With 10 different programs across Virginia, we have largely operated in a vacuum to some degree. But with the pandemic, it was obvious we were going to need to collaborate, kind of all hands on deck, and figure out how to respond in a meaningful way and do it in under such circumstances. So fortunately, we had two. Steve is with Virginia Poverty Law Center, and Legal Services Corporation of Virginia established a statewide COVID crisis response committee. And we have members from each legal aid, and we would meet weekly. Now we're meeting biweekly, and do nothing but figure out what our responses be, share data, and that would help guide our work in individual programs and allow us to try to advocate within the confines of what we can do, but with trying to do so. Our agency is called, with the Supreme Court, is the Office of the Executive Secretary. So as Sarah said, we did get resistance from them on, cooperating on a big level. So what we have done is gotten that information that we needed from the RVA Eviction Lab, and Steve can talk more about that, and definitely from the LSC data team has been crucial to that. And so through that process, we've coordinated our efforts, and I think through that committee have been a lot more impactful in what we've been able to do.
So one of the things that we thought was very important to develop was an early warning system for the eviction tsunami that we had been anticipating for quite some time. And so we were able to get a volunteer data engineer who did a lot of court data analysis by collecting it, electronically and disseminating it. And so he worked with us as a volunteer, but as you all know, volunteers don't last forever. And then we were seeing the numbers drop, which gave us some cause for relief. But we knew that the tsunami was eventually going to come. We knew that there were pandemic-related eviction protections that were going to expire on July 1st of 2022. So we had to scramble for a data source, data collection source. And thankfully, LSC's Civil Courts Data Initiative was opened and looking for things to do, and we jumped on them and made them very busy. And so you'll hear what they've been doing for us, but the genesis of it was to try to get this early warning system in place before the restrictions, the eviction restrictions expired. And sure enough, once they did, the numbers started to climb drastically. And we watched it happen in real time as opposed to just responding. So I think we were in a much better position to deploy, legal resources to address the tsunami than we otherwise would have been.
So finding partners and establishing partnerships is one thing, but really setting up the processes for continuing those partnerships is quite another. Hazel, you talked a bit about setting up the MOU, and we have a copy of the MOU in the Whova app, by the way, if you guys want to check it out. Could you and Kelly and Jen tell us a little bit more about the process behind the MOU and any internal or external barriers you faced as you set that up?
Yeah, like I said, we first started meeting about this. I want to say it was in April, late April, early May of 2021. And we didn't actually finish getting it signed by everyone until December of that year. So it's not a fast process throughout the entire thing. And I will say on our end, there's just a lot of moving pieces. We did have our very first meeting with legal aid, and they came over to the Capitol and we met, and it was a lot of people in the room. I mean, we had our court administrator, we had our deputy for court services, our deputy for operations, our deputy for IT, the director of research and data, and then we had on legal aid, who was there on the legal aid side?
Our ED, myself, Jen, and I think our housing unit director.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a pretty packed room, talking about, well, why is this data important? How are you going to use that data? And all of us really coming to a consensus. This is an important effort that both of us are going to, see some of these benefits. And we did spend some time talking about some of our concerns from the courts that I think are important for me to just mention. A lot of times I know that the courts will get this bad name that we don't want to share data. And I promise that's not necessarily the case. But there's always going to be some concerns that the courts are going to have because it's not our data. We're just the stewards of the data. We want to make sure that people understand what data we're giving them so that there isn't a misunderstanding or a misuse of that data. And a lot of times people who are requesting data don't realize that there are people in positions like my position that will help you get the data that you need. So maybe you're asking the wrong people. But really just making sure that the data that you're requesting is actually available, because sometimes it's not in an electronic form that we can query. So if you want something that, for example, in Nebraska is in an order, I can tell you when the order happened, but I can't query everything that's in the order. So understanding things like that is extremely important. And I think just having those conversations, that first meeting was extremely important for us to be able to start moving forward in the MOU process, because it really did help us understand what you're trying to do, and they understood what data we have, so that we have that mutual understanding, so that we could move forward. Did I miss anything?
No, well, and I think I'll add to that, because everything Hazel is saying is absolutely true. And I think from where I sit and from my perspective, one of the things that was really important to me was, and this was before I even realized that maybe there was that kind of hesitancy from the courts in terms of having misunderstandings around the data. I mean, the kind of aha moment for me was, well, I don't actually know what this code means in this field here. I need somebody to communicate with me and help me understand so that we can actually do the appropriate analysis on it. And so I guess from those initial discussions, my biggest takeaway from this is relationship building is incredibly important, and it can help facilitate movement forward on something that seems kind of insurmountable at times. So I would encourage folks to really take the time and be thoughtful about that. And it's not that, it wasn't like I was like, oh, the courts are tying our hands and they're not letting us do blah, blah, blah. It's more about I understood where they were coming from in terms of wanting that, but we also have a need, and we need to be able to use that data in a way that's productive and good for what we need it for. And coming to a consensus and a shared understanding is so important. And because of that, you know, we now can come together and have an ongoing conversations in this kind of relationship that's continuous learning about the data. So there are things that change data. I mean, just before even this session, we were talking about stuff that I hadn't even thought about with the data that we already have. And so having that as a resource to talk about it is just very important.
And then I'll just add from, you know, the perspective of what kind of data that we wanted. Clearly, whatever's within our priority areas that the state courts have. And so, you know, under our children and families priority, getting information about protection orders and divorces, paternity, custody, child support orders, debt collection cases, eviction cases, and understanding our statewide, from my perspective, and I know that it's set up a different way, but our state court database is called Justice. And so we can search individual cases or even types of cases in real time, and we do that too. But having this information by county, by case type, and by outcome is really helpful for us to identify what's going on in across the state, and where, you know, we can be of benefit, and how, you know, eventually how effective our assistance will be, whether it's helping somebody with representation or self-help in the outcome of their case. Are they able to achieve what they wanted to achieve? And so that's what we do, and we call them data dumps, but we get them on a quarterly basis, and Kelly can talk. We don't have to go into details, but in a huge 3 separate files.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And I will say that one of the things that I most appreciated about having those conversations with Legal Aid of Nebraska is that they really understood our concerns for confidentiality and privacy of the people that we serve in the courts. And, you know, we just talked about protection orders and, you know, some of these really sensitive cases. And so in the back of our minds, we're always thinking about the policies and federal and state laws that might prohibit us from sharing certain types of data. And so being able to have that dialogue with each other and understanding the importance of why that data needs to go out or why we can't share something is extremely useful as you start building your MOU.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, in preparing for today, you know, we've met several times, and it was invaluable for me to hear Hazel and her perspective on that, because it's given me new ideas of what we can do and what I, you know, plan to do. Our inclination, again, pandemic rules, we were trying to do things quickly, but we started with the top of our, you know, Office of Executive Secretary and tried to get assistance and met resistance there. We didn't know there was a position like Hazel's. And she said, yeah, there's one in every state. We go to a conference. We went to a conference in your state, actually. And afterwards, I'm like, how did I not know this person existed? And I spent 20 minutes online trying to find it, and it's nowhere. And I'm like, it's not set up for us to find them. So it reminded me, as they said, you have to get to the right person, and you have to let other people help you get to the right person, which we've already told you we're going to be contacting you for. But having that relationship building and just establishing a dialogue with that person, letting them know, because if you're asking somebody that's at the top of, you know, whoever that's making the decisions, they don't know about what the actual, you know, data and collection methods and everything that they're doing. She does. They do. They can help share that with you, tell you what you should realistically be asking for and everything else. Hazel also pointed out that, you know, as lawyers, we tend to just FOIA. You know, if you need something, you FOIA it. And, you know, we ended up with a not helpful data dump that was not helpful. And Hazel was pointing out that, you know, if you just call and are talking to them, and again, you have to establish a relationship. All of this is about getting to the right person and then establishing a working relationship with them. But she's like, I can tell you what you can and can't get. I can tell you how to get it if you tell me what you need. And so we're not spinning our wheels. So it just reminded me to get back to more of the basics and sometimes just stop thinking like a lawyer, and do that interpersonal. It can make a big difference. So I'm determined to find out who the person from Virginia is and make them my best friend. But yeah, it reminded me that you have to keep trying.
Absolutely. So Kelly and Jen get a data dump, quarterly data dump, but for Amy and Steve, it's a little bit of a different process. They come to our team at LSE with questions or areas of concern or just urgent data needs. And we work together to identify data solutions and information and analyses that will be most helpful for them in moving forward with their work. I think the hardest part of this process is figuring out what questions to ask of the data. So what is your process for identifying when data can be helpful in providing better services?
I'm an endless source of questions for LSE's data team. And I think it comes with, this is not my first time working with court data. I've worked with it. I think my first time was in 2008 when I was a legal aid attorney in Rhode Island and did a study about foreclosure-related evictions and the incidence of them. This was before a lot of electronic stuff was available. So we had to send people into the courthouses and go through files manually in part. Every single file. Thankfully, it was Rhode Island, and so it's a small state with small amounts of litigation, although maybe not so much on a per capita basis. But so it was possible to do it that way. But it's like if a problem is in front of us, if there's a way to use data to solve it, or if not solve it, to make a case that a solution is necessary, that's what we do. So I'll just give you some of the most recent examples of that. So initially it was, we wanted this early warning system, and that was fairly easy to do because all that required was getting, all the filings together and having the data team, analyze it for us so we could find out who were the frequent filers, when there were spikes in evictions, in almost every single court in the state of Virginia, which is rather amazing. Then I started using it in litigation. We filed what is called a writ of prohibition. We were trying to get the Supreme Court of Virginia to restrain the first level trial courts from hearing cases involving CARES Act properties. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, there's a federal law that requires 30 days notice for landlords of certain kinds of properties that are called covered properties. I won't get into the weeds as to what that all is. So I approached the data team and said, hey, can you correlate the National Low Income Housing Coalition's database of CARES Act properties with the eviction filings to tell us what percentage of evictions were filed by CARES Act covered properties? And lo and behold, it didn't take them long. They ran their numbers and produced first an initial report, which I looked at and said, you're missing a lot of stuff. Because there were actually two fields of data to analyze to get to that. And the team just looked at one, and when they looked at two, then the picture became much more accurate and clearer. And it turned out that statewide, there are about 28% of all evictions filed since between July and September were CARES Act covered properties. So we wanted the courts to understand that, it's not every property that we're talking about, but it's a significant number of cases. Unfortunately, the writ was denied. I learned about that on the plane ride here. But in addition to that, we also use the data to talk about, because we wanted the court to actually restrain them from hearing a whole bunch of cases, because there were like about 200 cases filed with the same landlord, with the same notice, bad notice. So the data team was able to, once the cases got heard, to come up with a list of dispositions for all 200 cases, which we tried to put in front of the court to support a stay, which they did not grant. So there's like, I think if you understand that you can make a case with data, it becomes much easier to make a query. So that's how I do it, and I've got more up my sleeve.
Yeah, and individually at the, separate legal aid organizations, like with my program, we get an email from them. We get an email from Daniel every single week that has a report for the numbers for the entire state broken down by county, city. It's incredible the amount of service area. It's an incredible amount of information we get, and in a really usable, readable form. Like, we don't have a lot of time to do deep dives. We're handling cases, whatever else, but it's very readable, very usable, and it guides what we do each week. Like last week, we saw one of our courts that we were not going to have somebody in had, 10 times the amount of eviction filings that week than it normally did. So we switched resources, and had 2 attorneys and 2 paralegals go to it last week. That piece of it has been terrific. I will say there hasn't been a single thing that we've asked the LSC data team that they haven't given to us quickly and given to us well. It's kind of like a little magic wishing well. We think of some amazing thing that we want to know, and they just go find it. It's been really, now that I say that, they'll tell me, no, we can't do that. But it's been really great. And like I said, it's in a readable, usable form. I'm not a data person. I've had to become one to some degree, but I need something quick, readable, and something I can use. And they definitely have given us that. So I'd encourage you, if you haven't done that, it's worthwhile.
Thanks, guys. That's very nice of you to say.
She gave me $20.
Yeah.
We paid
And
all
a
of them
book.
to say nice things. So Kelly and Jen, I think for you guys, the work you're doing now is kind of figuring out those reports on your end and figuring out how you can use these massive data dumps that you're getting to advance your work in a lot of different ways. Could you tell us a little bit more about your process for identifying the different ways you can use this data, other data sources you can combine it with to make useful reports or dashboards and many other things, and just where you're hoping to go with it?
So if I'm going to be completely transparent with you, it's a long, hard, road. We don't have the resources that LSC does. So we're still really, there's a lot of things that we can do, and we can look at things at, in terms of like just basic numbers of how many filings there are and that kind of thing. But really what we're in the middle of trying to do is to understand what some of this data really represents and how it can be most useful. And so, like I said, even right before this session, having a conversation and understanding that there might be some parts of the data, or even that we have existing, that maybe aren't as useful to us and are what we're trying to do in the first place. And so being able to have that dialogue again is really important. However, what I do understand about the data and how we can use it, at least internally for now, and until I feel comfortable that we're good on both sides, is really helping us to identify where maybe we might be able to put our resources and more quickly, I guess, than maybe we were before. The goal, I think, is to be able to connect our case management system cases to the court data, so that we can start to see what's happening there. What are some of those outcomes? Maybe it's with people that are getting brief services, but then that becomes more complicated and perhaps beyond the resources that we have in-house. So that might have to trigger some future conversations about how we grow our in-house capacity to be able to do these things, or do we bring somebody in from the outside to help us get this stuff set up in a way that will help us automate how we look at the information. It is difficult, okay? So you can't necessarily just go, okay, I'm going to learn this. Just because I've been doing this kind of work for, like 17 years doesn't mean I'm going to look at a new data set and automatically understand what it means and know everything that I can do with it. And so, at least for somebody like myself, it's not necessarily innate and intuitive. It takes me time to work through it, and I want to be confident in what I am looking at and what I'm understanding before I disseminate it anywhere. So I don't know. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the projects that we have been able to.
Sure. I mean, we have been getting court data since, I think, 2016, and I think that request went back to data from 2011.
Yeah.
So we had the formal MOU in place in 2021, but we've been getting court data for many years now. And we have used it on things like determining where to put our resources and what kind of projects to develop. So like, for example, for our PBIF grant, to do a pro bono project and figuring out court filings and what legal needs were showing up the most, and from what we could tell, who was self-represented, to identify, what kind of services that we wanted to provide in the state, in what counties for pro bono assistance. And when we got a disaster relief grant, we did the same thing. And so court data is just one of the things that we're looking at when we're trying to determine either what the issue is or where to put our resources. One of the first things that we did was a debt collection kind of query, and this was in 2016, 2017. Leora Berluski, who used to work at Legal Aid of Nebraska, was involved in that too. But having just an understanding of Nebraska is not normal. There was a ProPublica article on that. We have like 79,000 collection cases filed a year. So like as much as Cook County. For a variety of different reasons. But in Omaha, which is the largest city in Nebraska and county, but trying to understand then how many debt collection cases are filed against who. And so overlaying census data with the collection cases and the amounts and like the percentage of poverty and race and ethnicity information, we're able to see who is being collected against and not a big surprise, low-income people who are people of color, for debts as little as like $10 or whatever. And so, to take that information and to educate the public about what's going on and how then we are going to create a plan to try to change that system. And we've done the same thing with not necessarily court data, but our PICA data. And again, redlining was very prevalent in Omaha, Nebraska. And so even today, like how many cases, who are they coming from, and how do they align with the redlining districts? So those are the kinds of the things that we have done with our data. But, in addition to census data, case management data, court data, we overlay all different kinds of things Kelly can say. But like, and for example, we have a process. So we have units. That's how we're do our legal program. So priority areas. But we have task forces. On a quarterly basis, Kelly presents to the task forces. She tells us, how many requests for assistance, what kinds of cases, what our outcomes are, what our trends are, the financial and economic impact that we're having. And Rachel Perry helped us develop how we are tracking our outcomes at this point in time. And so that we have an idea of what kind of legal needs are emerging for our clients and the impact that we have on our cases. And that's kind of what we're doing.
The only other thing I would add to what Jen said is by doing the regular interactions with staff and talking to them about data, informally, I think has grown data literacy among our staff. And I think that that's so important. And we recently just got awarded a TIG grant that I think will help us to formalize those processes and really help me to understand how our staff learns or is interested or not in data, and if not, how can I make it usable for them and be able to walk away with something that will be usable in a meaningful way, or along those lines.
So just a few things then, no major projects or anything.
A little overwhelming.
Yeah, so as you can see, lots of different uses for court data, lots of ways to integrate it into your work every day. But it does take quite a bit of effort, quite a bit of time from a lot of different people. A question for all of you, and you can just go down the line if you like. How have these data sharing partnerships improved the efficiency or the effectiveness of your work? And what measures are you taking to ensure that these partnerships can be sustained for the long term?
You go first.
Yeah, I guess I do.
Yeah.
Well, for sure, they've made us operate more efficiently in that when we see eviction spikes, we know, okay, we got to allocate resources to address them. So one of the things that we did was we looked at some of the mass evictors, because that is now a phenomenon, meaning, same landlord is evicting hundreds of people. So we used the data to identify those places, and we sent our outreach person there to spread out information, know your rights information, and, with legal aid contact information. And a number of people were able to get legal representation that way. So my program is not LSC funded, but an LSC funded entity could work with a community organization or either that does direct organizing work, if those exist in your service areas, or just some other social service provider who might be willing to just do it. So that's so we used it to identify mass evictions. We actually also used it to identify in the medical debt space some of the providers that were healthcare providers that were doing it, including one on the Eastern Shore of Virginia, which was set up to serve poor people. And so our health people basically said, hey, what's up with all this? And that's led to some more dialogue around, trying to avoid doing that kind of work. So, it definitely makes us operate more efficiently. And what measures are you taking to ensure these partnerships can be sustained for the long term? Just have lots of nice chit chat with the data team, and make sure that they're happy and that we're not overloading them and treating them respectfully and all of that. We don't have any measures in place. Measurement, like quantitative measures to measure the effectiveness. The fact that we get these reports weekly, I think, demonstrates that's a measure of effectiveness, because we're operating from very current data all of the time, which has been transformative. Every single because we're a state support center, we hear from people in the field, and so many people have complimented the work that comes from LSC and they tell me we use this all the time. So that is, again, it's not a quantitative measure, but the feedback that we get, and I ask people too sometimes. So that's how we've been doing it.
One of the things that I've been surprised by, that I wouldn't have expected we would be able to use the data for, but it's been integral in us being able to get additional funding, and additional staff, most importantly, because you have all these eviction cases, you have all these things going on. What we started was at the beginning of the pandemic, started an eviction clinic pilot project in one of our offices in one of our largest courts. And that was an in-court clinic there every week. We have a team of attorneys there every week, and started doing that. And we were doing it just kind of building the ship as we sailed. We had, I didn't go in and get permission from the court to do it. I didn't go in. It was kind of pandemic rules. Just started showing up and doing it. And what was amazing is the relationship that we have with the court now versus before. I mean, we are a part of the court system now. Like one of our judges came up to us at an event at the end of last year and said that she wished we could be in every single one of their dockets, that they love having legal aid there. And if, 2 years ago, that would not have been the response we would have gotten. It's allowed us to develop a really good relationship with the courts and has showed value in what legal aid can do and how important it is that you're leveling that playing field, and they appreciate that. Being able to do that and having that support from them, we started out with 1 clinic and we've now expanded to 4 more clinics and are continuing to build that across our program. And in doing that, the data has been, extremely useful in being able to show what we've accomplished with that. How many evictions we've been able to prevent, what the impact of what we've been doing. And in doing that, we've been able, just in the one office that we started in, we've been able to add an attorney, 2 litigation paralegals, and an outreach person. Those are things we never would have been able to get funding for before. And it was strictly driven by just doing it, and the funding came. Like, we obviously had to seek it out, but you have the data, you have the information to show the value in it. And then we have the relationship with the courts now where they support it. They actually asked us to expand to other courts. And so when you have that support, that makes a huge difference. Part of that funding as well, we got funding from our local city to actually pay for an attorney. So we have another attorney that's paid for by the city. So it's really a good tool to be able to do that and to be able to show the value of what you've done and to build that relationship with the court.
I mean, one of the things that we have done, because we're talking about evictions now, and it's not through the court data dumps that we get, but we also get real-time eviction data just by, and we did get permission to scrape. So we'll scrape the database and every week, and we had a developer help us so that the court docket party information can be put in a spreadsheet and mail merged. And we work with, and especially in the 2 largest cities where most of the evictions are happening, we have a collaboration with the Volunteer Lawyers Project and the law schools, where we're a partner, and we call it the Tenant Assistance Project, where they're at the courthouse providing day of representation to tenants, and we're providing eviction representation. But on a weekly basis, we get that docket information and provide information to tenants through the mail about, their rights as tenants, and just basic information that they have probably an upcoming court hearing and things like that. So that's been very helpful, and it helps us plan too how many people should be at the courthouse and preparing for how many hearings every week. So that's just one of the things that we're doing with the eviction data that we're getting through the scraper.
I can I'm gonna deviate a little bit from what we were originally kind of talking about. I think in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, like having now gone to several sessions about data this week, and I've been thinking a lot about what that means to me personally in terms of the work that I do and my organization as a whole, but also just, the legal aid community, and just really kind of coming to terms with the fact that, we may all, like, at times need to think about our own capacity to do things, be clear when it's okay to ask for help when you don't understand something. That's why I think I've really been stressing the idea of data literacy and building strong relationships, because the only way I think that you can really do that in an environment where we are always under-resourced and have less capacity, we have to think smarter, not harder. And so just by the sake of working with a partner to get this type of information in place, that automatically creates an efficiency for me in terms of just being able to not have to go through a whole bunch of different hoops to try to even begin to have the conversation. It builds from there. And so each time we make a step forward in understanding or shared language, it's these incremental wins that I think build up. And so I guess you have to be very patient, but at the same time, I feel like the reward and the payoff is going to be very, pretty powerful. I mean, I don't think I'm ever going to be in a position where I'm going to have like 10 people or more on a team that will be able to do this kind of thing. And so this is where I think community is really important, and having the relationships and knowing what your limitations might be or where you want to have continuous learning, but also relying on the program staff to help guide where you might go, because it's very easy to get this sort of creep and want to look at everything. And so sometimes it really just helps to narrow the focus a little bit, at least from my perspective. And I think that at the end of the day will make us more effective.
And I do want to say, as we've gone through this MOU process, it's really strengthened our relationship, both Legal Aid of Nebraska and the Administrative Office of the Courts. And part of that is because we now have a mutual understanding of each other's system, not fully. I can't tell you everything that Kelly does, and she can't tell you everything I do, but we understand what data we're sharing, and we're talking the same language, which is, I think, extremely important for that long-term relationship. But the MOU, or the data sharing agreement, the reason I push so hard for that internally is because it provides a long-term documentation. We're not going to be in our positions forever. Things happen, people move, there's growth, there's change. And having that documentation is extremely important, especially when you're onboarding somebody new and they're taking on something else, or there's growth within your agency. Having that documentation and having somewhere to go back to look at that historical knowledge of, well, what happened, what were the decisions that were made, and we have something that is in writing. It gives you the rules of the game. You know what you're doing, and we're all talking the same language. So right now we're still building an understanding of all of our data. We're still working together, but it's really helping sustain that partnership for the long run. And it's helped really internally build these types of documents with other agencies that we might be sharing data with, because we had a partnership that was so open to this process that, it did take us 6-7 months to do. Maybe we'll get faster at it. I don't know. But it did allow us to start that foundation, to start building, these types of data sharing and documentation for the long term with the AOC. And kind of like Kelly said, one of the things that I've been hearing over and over throughout this conference that I've really enjoyed is, the idea that we always keep coming back to the data. The data is important. It's going to help drive your decision making, and I love hearing that. And it's really important to ask the questions when you don't understand, and not just assume you understand what's in the data. Even when you think you are data savvy, there is context to each of those data items that is very important. So it's important that you start building those relationships and asking the questions, even when you feel silly asking a question about something that you think you should know. Don't be embarrassed to ask.
Yep, always good advice, I think. Don't be embarrassed to ask questions in any situation. So that might be actually a really good transition to asking questions right now. So if y'all are ready to answer, I can come around with the mic if y'all just want to raise your hands and you can ask away.
Hi. Oh, yes. Okay. So I'm like a data rookie is what we'll call it, right? So like sometimes it's intimidating to come to these because like I don't even know where to start. So can you talk a little bit about like when you started this process? Like I'm an attorney. I don't do math. Numbers. It's scares me. So can you talk to me about kind of how that started and like how you got, like how you learned things? And maybe take some of the mystery out of it and like make it a little less scary for us. Us rookies that big.
I will tell you that I say I can't math on almost a daily basis. So, I mean, I'm just taking this one for a second, but it's not something that's intuitive to me. I never like thought that I was going to do a research type based job. Not really. Before I came to Legal Aid, I ended up being a graduate assistant in the College of Public Health at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, and I ended up staying there for almost 10 years. And I got the opportunity through that to have a good network of people to learn from, how to do all that stuff. But I absolutely understand your question. Even when I started, and I transitioned, even people who are well trained or have backgrounds, there's always going to be a moment of, do I know what I'm doing? Do I have like sort of imposter syndrome? Absolutely. And if anybody tells you they've never done that, I'm sure they're probably either not aware that that's really what was happening, or they're just very good at lying. I don't know. But I feel like it's really important to understand that you're not alone. And my process for learning is going to be a lot different than yours. And that's why when I was talking earlier, I need to meet you halfway to see what it is that you don't understand, and how do you learn? What's the best way that you're going to learn and take in the insights or the data that we're trying to look at? I don't know all of the questions to ask, so I'm going to come to you as the program person to kind of help lead that conversation.
And I will say that I come from the opposite end, and a lot of training in math and a lot of statistics classes. And I will say that I would encourage you to not say that you don't math, because we all math. And it's important for you to not be afraid to ask the questions and look at your data, and that you're using that data to make good decisions. You're not just taking anecdotal stories or evidence and saying we're going to drive our decisions because of this. No, we have actual data, and this is why we're going to make this decision. And so I don't want you to feel like this is just extremely daunting, and because you're an attorney, you can't or shouldn't be looking at the data. I would say, yes, look at the data and ask a lot of questions, because that's how you're going to get better. But also look for the people who feel comfortable talking about the data. And remember that you have an aspect of the whole of the story that we as researchers will not have. We need you in order to do a good job, because you understand the context, and maybe we understand how to run the analyses and build the models, but without that collaboration and working together, it would not work. So just go out there and ask the questions.
And I would suggest you start with the LSC data team, because they have been terrific at explaining things. I'm not, very technologically inclined, or at least since the pandemic. But they will send like these beautiful, colorful graphs, and it's just great. They sent us one the other day. And it had an analysis for the entire year 2022 and compared it to 2021, had all these terrific graphs that I could look at in 5 minutes and get all the information from that would have taken forever to read through in a more complicated report. So they make it easy for us to digest, and then they're very responsive when you ask, okay, what does this mean? I don't know what this is. Can you explain this? They've been very good. I would start with them.
I don't know what you do as a lawyer. I'm a litigator primarily, although I've done lots of other things too. And let me try to frame it this way. As a litigator, like if you're doing a trial, you're basically telling a story to a judge. And, the story is told through evidence that we introduce through our, kabuki theater kind of way that we have to do. So I think you should think about, well, how do I tell this story? Are there, like, how do I make my case? And like one source of it, way of making a case is to use factual information that comes from numbers. So, for example, in a fair housing case, if you're like doing some sort of disparate impact case, which I hope people understand, and if you don't worry about it. Because what you have to show in a disparate impact case is that some policy or practice is negatively affecting a discrete group of people who are protected by the Fair Housing Act. That's as simple as I can do it. So there's you can make out a case using statistics and data and stuff like that. You don't have to necessarily make it and create it. You need to know where to go to find people who can do that for you. I started off I'm not a math person. I am a data geek, and I don't use math, really. I know what story I want to tell, and I think about, well, what kinds of statistical information can help me tell my story. So with the writ of prohibition, we wanted to tell a story that, hey, there's a tsunami of evictions that resulted because of the expiration of all these pandemic restrictions, but there's one left called the CARES Act. It was to try to elevate the importance of this, and also to show, what percentage of the cases that the courts were seeing were CARES Act cases. So, I think, and my friends at LSC keep telling me, what are you trying to show with the data? And that's a question that I think you could ask. Like, okay, I have to prove my case. How do I prove my case? Are there these, publicly available statistics that might help me? And if the statistics have to be compiled from raw data, I got to find someone who can do that for me. And that's where LSC came in, because I don't write code, thankfully. I don't know how to hash data. Thank you for teaching me that term. But don't worry what it means. I found that it means turning data into mush so that nobody knows it's to protect like confidentiality, for example. So I hope that that's somewhat helpful, because it's really not a heavy lift. You think about like how you make your case, and then try to find the people to help you do it. And if it involves data sets, find our friends at LSC. They can probably help you, at least when it comes to court data. And another aspect is just like, okay, could the court data be, combined with other kinds of data to help me make my case? Again, with the CARES Act example, there was this database of CARES Act covered properties, and then we sort of merged them together and told the story. So I don't be afraid of numbers. Don't think that this is all math. Think of it as, if you're a lawyer, think of it as like, how do I prove my case? How do I convince my judge? And hopefully that's helpful.
I just had a quick question for for Hazel. As part of the court administration, would you say it would be easier or more productive to seek data directly from you guys, or through scraping mechanisms that we can do on our own? Which would be easier from your perspective? And also, what exactly is your court? What is your title, so that we can try and find somebody similar in our area? Thank you.
So my title, I am the Director of Research and Data. However, I will say that every state has slightly different titles. So when we first met with Virginia, for example, I kept saying the AOCP. They were like, what is the AOCP? And I said, the Administrative Office of the Courts. And they said, well, we don't have that. We have, what did you tell me you have? The
Office of the Executive
Office-
Secretary for the
Yes.
Supreme Court. Yeah.
So, but
That's
guess
really, you'd guess that would be a good name for it.
But guess what? It's the same thing. I went into their website and realized very quickly it's the same thing, but the titles are going to change. So I think that every state is going to be slightly different. In Nebraska, we have a lot of different mechanisms for acquiring data. We do have a self-service web portal where people could pay for every single download, but they charge for every single download, or you can get a massive data dump. But it's expensive. And so, if you don't have a lot of funding, it might be easier for you to just go directly to your version of your AOCP and have that conversation. Because sometimes they won't be as comfortable with you just data scraping off of their websites because the context is important. So I would start by having a conversation with the administration in your state and ask them first, do you have this data? This is what we're trying to use it for. And if they say no, then say, well, can we scrape your website because you have it in these areas and this is what we want? And they'll probably say yes. If it's public information.
Yeah, and if I can give credit to Hazel, during the session, she's emailed me 3 names for our state and then rated them in the information she got of who might be most receptive. So I'm not telling you to email Hazel, but I know what I would do. And honestly, that is something I learned from talking to them and getting that different perspective of how they do things. But I am going to make one of those people my best friend in the next 2 months if it kills me, because again, we started, somewhere else, and it reminded me again, it's all about, you have to get to the right person, and you have to be persistent with it. And, we didn't know those people existed. So it's not as much, you just have to start doing it. You just have to start. If you're looking for the perfect time to start trying to do this in the perfect way, you're never going to do it. You just got to kind of jump in, try to get to the right people. When you fail, go to somebody else, and then you'll get there. So it's the right people and then being persistent with it. And I think also something I've had success with in the past is when I get resistance, which I'm hard-headed, that makes me want to do it more. I will often use the example of something I've seen like in another state. Like you can bet I'll be using Nebraska as my example. And occasionally I can even get someone to speak to that person from another state and show how they've done it, share like the MOU, things like that. So they see it's doable and it's not that much for them to do and it has value for them. You got to show the value to get buy-in on those kind of collaborations. And that goes beyond the court. That goes to the community partners we've used this data to help get more funding and everything else.
I think we have time for one more question.
Self-promotion is a little bit embarrassing to me, but for your first question about how to get started with the legal data, I wrote a book that came out last January from Rutledge called Legal Data and Information in Practice, which is a primer on getting started with legal data if that's something that's of interest to you. I have a discount code if you want to come and talk to me after if yours is mine.
You will be my 5th book I bought since this conference.
It's Legal Data and Information in Practice.
I do want to just add really quickly, the National Center for State Courts does have what they call the Court Statistics Project. And so on an annual basis, states are asked to submit data to them. So they actually have a dashboard that's pretty user-friendly And on there, it'll have the liaisons. So if you're looking for the data specialist in a particular state, they would be a good agency to contact for that information. So the National Center for State Courts, and the project is the Court Statistics Project.
Sarah, I think there was one more question over here.
So I wanted to ask for some tips because I did have some, I had a love-hate relationship, not relation, with emergency rental assistance programs. And I wanted some tips on how I can approach courts maybe, because what I've learned with emergency rental assistance programs is when I requested data that would make them look good, they were happy to share it. So the example was in our statewide program, I would ask them, how much money have you dispersed by county? Because I wanted to identify zip codes and where we could do more outreach and how well we were doing in our area. They realized that they were doing pretty great. So they were on Twitter posting all of these numbers out of nowhere. But then I asked, so give me data on how many lenders have refused to participate. And that's where they were, you need to do a FOIA request, right? So they stopped sharing a lot of the information and I had to start doing FOIA requests all the time. And my purpose with court records is to try to find the needle in the haystack, because in Florida, it's pay to play. And I wanna find out which cases are actually getting a hearing. And with that, I'm gonna be able to identify which judges are granting hearings to see what strategies work. And I had a few law students go through hundreds of records and they found like one case that got a hearing. It was because the tenant actually paid the money into the court registry. But it may be data that could be perceived negatively. And out of those thousands of records that we never got a chance to go through, it would have been a lot easier if we would have had a disposition or outcome marking this as this was a default, or this was a final judgment based on a default for failure to pay to play or whatever it was. So any suggestions or tips before I approach the courts and, get shut down or something?
This is probably better for Hazel, but I just want to make one quick plug that I think that we've heard several times throughout this conference. Honestly, I think it makes other entities like the courts feel a lot better if you have somebody on the inside that can have that conversation with them and be able to have that reciprocal back and forth. Because if not, that's where some of it might kind of start to fall apart, honestly. And it does make it a little bit easier to kind of grease the wheels. So the big statement I'm really trying to make is it's very important to, if you're not already doing it, and having inside capacity to do this kind of work takes investment, it takes prioritization, and I would just encourage you to start there. But I don't know, maybe you want to.
I will just say that I take offense. I promise you, we're not trying to hide data. At least we're not with the Nebraska AOCP. And we don't look at requests and say, oh, this is going to make us look bad, so we're going to smash it. It's really about the resources. A lot of times we don't have a big data team. So my team is a team of 6. And we are not just looking at court data, it's also probation data. And so it is a very big system, 93 counties, 93 different databases that get put into one. And so sometimes we don't have the ability to give you the data that you want in the way that you're asking for it. So that's where I think that making those relationships with people internally to the AOC is extremely important. I also will say that, one thing that I will always tell people is your agenda is not my agenda. And it's not that I don't care what you're using, what you're trying to push, or what you're doing, but what my job is to be objective, to try to get you the data that you need in a quickly and efficient way. So it's never we're gonna take this request because it's gonna make us look good. Because when you think about the court system, there are so many different types of courts that are cases that are being filed. I can promise you right now, I can't tell you what would make us look good because we have so many different cases. But I will say that making it a priority internally in your organization and having someone that understands data internally to have those conversations with the data specialist within the AOC is extremely important, because then that objectivity is there. And there's, those feelings of, oh, you're trying to hide something, or, it's not going to make you look good, are kind of put aside because that objectivity is there. So I would recommend, and I heard this at one of the talks, one of the speakers said this yesterday, it's kind of like hygiene. You brush your teeth every day. Well, you want your data and you want to make good decisions using that data. Make it a line item on your budget. Start investing in your data so that you can start having those objective conversations with the AOC internally, because it's hard not to have those emotions of, oh, you're hiding something. And I get it. I've been the researcher asking for the data and getting told no. It feels like, oh, they're hiding something. But we're not, I promise. So relationships, that's what I'm saying. Relationships, and hire someone that knows data.
Yeah, this was a drinking game, and relationship was the word. So.
All right. Thank you guys so much for coming. We really appreciate your time, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks so much.